World from Oktopost headquarters. This is Radically Transparent, Oktopost's original podcast show on B2B marketing now. I'm Jennifer Gutman, Director of Social Strategy, and in most episodes of this podcast, we'll feature B2B marketing leaders who will share their radically transparent truths behind being a modern-day marketer and what it takes to grow ideas, take risks, and impact change. Joining me on this podcast episode of Radically Transparent is Ari Applbaum, VP Marketing at Audioburst. Ari, welcome to the show.
Hi, it's good to be here. I'm a big fan and I'm excited to talk to you today.
We're super proud to have you here, excited to hear your journey. I know you've had quite the 2020, and I was hoping we might be able to kick off this episode with a little bit of a backstory of how you found yourself where you are today.
Sure. So where do I start? I'm a proud father of 4 boys, ages 3 to 11, and a proud husband to Naama, who's one of the world's first female Orthodox rabbis. We live in Jerusalem, the 6 of us, which means I'm doomed forever to commute to work since there's not enough senior marketing roles in Jerusalem. I've been in marketing for about 15 years, Jen. I started out when I applied for a strategic marketing internship at a global PR firm called Reuter Finn. That was around 2005. And I owe almost everything to my 3-year baptism by fire at Reuter Finn. Then I left for a stint in nonprofit marketing. That's where you and I met years ago. That took me to Boston. And we came back. I went back to agencies. I started Finn Partners, then Venture First. So a lot of PR work. And then I decided to make the switch to in-house. I love the deep dive and the brushing up with product, sales, operations, R&D that you have at a startup and you don't necessarily get when you're at an agency and your only point of contact is the CMO. I wouldn't give that up for anything in the world. So since I went in-house, I've had 3 positions. My first role was at AnyClip, which does really cool video AI analysis and content management of video. I was there for 3 years. Then I joined AppsFlyer that recently raised funds from Salesforce. They're the global leader in mobile attribution. I think you had a couple of guests from AppsFlyer recently. What?
We did. We had the one and only Jonathan Rivet on the show.
Jonathan's amazing. Yeah, I worked with Jonathan closely. I had a purely comms role, which was interesting to do at AppsFlyer. It was interesting to take my PR and brand background and apply it to one company. And then just earlier this month, I joined Audioburst as VP Marketing. Audioburst is a really cool company. Our vision is to organize the world's audio content and make it universally accessible. And I think that's important because it's time to release humanity from the shackles of screens. And so much content is consumed via images and text and video. Whereas if you think about it, our primal mode of communication is actually voice. So that's my job. We have a really cool platform that we built for audio search and delivery and the largest library of topical audio content. And my job is to market it to the world and see who wants to add that layer of next-gen listening experiences to their app, product, website, whatever.
Wow. Okay. So you've had quite the marketing journey, and you definitely, there's a few buzzwords that I heard, AI, video, tons of noise out there, and, breaking through to use sound, audio. We'll touch on it all on today's episode. And I guess we're really, there's a lot to dive into, and I'm really glad to have an expert like you on the show to dive into this because there's a lot of our audience questioning, where AI plays a role and even video and sound and how this all comes together for marketers to use and to really reach out and impact their audiences. So with all of this going on in 2020, and by this, we have a pandemic going on where, as you said, you want to free us all from our screens. What keeps you up at night in your field, in what you do and where you are, or where do you find the most challenges?
Well, that's a fascinating question, Jen. In the audio industry, it's really interesting. I think the stars are perfectly aligned. There's been an incredible explosion in content. You want to guess how many podcasts are listed now on Apple? Do you know?
I feel. Let me think if I can throw out a number. I do not know, but I'm almost intimidated to know because I'm like, where would this one stand?
Exactly. So there's actually 1.5 million podcasts, which is double what they had last year, right? So this explosion in podcasts. Um, that's on the one hand. There's so much content that's being produced, and you know how much effort and time and money is poured into this content, and it's really good. And on the other hand, we're surrounding ourselves with devices that make audio consumption so easy. So AirPods, for example, um, Mark Anderson wrote, number one investor in the Valley. He wrote last year that it's deceptive because we think it's a little thing, but really it's huge. When people walk around with these things for hours, it makes audio so much more accessible and echoes, smart home devices and connected speakers. We had 0 last year, then we got our first one. Now we have 4 in the house. So what does it mean to be surrounded with all these devices and all the content that's available on the other? So I think you hit the nail on the head when you said the problem is um, cutting through the noise. I think that's what keeps a lot of people, a lot of marketers up at night with video, with audio, with a lot of formats, is how do you cut through the noise? Um, for us, it's a huge opportunity. So I'm not so concerned about that because we're that enabler, that bridge between the content and the user. But I guess if I have to talk about my fear, it's the race to who will be the bridge, who will be the enabler of that. So if the big guys, Amazon, Google, Apple, even Spotify, take it on as a core mission, how quickly can they run to make up for the years that we already invested in this? And the other thing that keeps me up at night is the global recession, right? COVID and everything that's happening. Even if we all get vaccines, the effects on the economy as a whole are going to last. High tech, particularly, could suffer from dry ups in investments and the like. And I see that marketing is usually the first to get hit in those situations. So the next few years are going to be interesting, but I'm excited about what's coming.
Well, we'll have to have you on for seasons 4, 5, 6, and the next few years to kind of keep track of what's happening in the industry. And what I think is
Yeah.
really interesting, what you're sharing in terms of what you do with audio, what's almost very interesting to me is that media almost started, right? It started with radio. I mean, it started essentially with marketing, with billboards and traditional marketing, but then it moved into radio. And in the 40s, where radio was a huge way that people consumed information, and then you had the television, and then computers, and then continue. But it almost seems like we've come full circle back to audio. So I almost find the history of this really interesting, only because what was once obsolete as a way of getting your message out is almost making a comeback. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. As I said, I think that audio and voice is our most primal way to communicate. And I think there's going to be people are going to want to take a step back because we're being spoon fed so much junk and stuff, and visual content is sometimes so superficial. What's nice about audio, well, it's nice about reading. When you read, you're able to imagine, think about Harry Potter or other books, movies, right? It's always best to read it first, but that still requires a lot of time and effort. What's nice about audio is, yes, the content is sort of fed to you. You don't have to do much to get it. So you can do it in all kinds of moments in life, but it still sparks the imagination, which is pretty cool.
So I wanted to go back on something you touched on. So you shared with us that you started your career at Readerfin, and I know that you have a giant amount of experience in PR. And I want to shift the conversation for a moment to public relations to ask a little bit about, do you feel that PR still holds the same value in our new normal? We just talked about how much weight audio and video and content
Hmm.
is having. Where is the role today in PR?
It's an interesting question, and it's debated a lot. One of my first moves here at Audioburst was to bring on a PR firm. So I still believe PR holds value, but it's more complicated than that, right? Because so much of marketing today is about lead generation and the funnel, and PR will almost always lose to any other forms of growth or performance. It's so much cheaper to acquire leads in almost any other way. And interestingly, brand awareness too, right? So it's also cheaper to get to audiences in other digital formats that are not strict media relations. Um, but there is a certain weight, gravitas, that's still attached to consistent coverage, and especially to coverage in the right trade publications and top tier business and tech pubs that are really hard to get anywhere else. And I felt that when I joined the Forbes Communication Councils a couple of years ago, I got so much attention. And that was even, it's not pure media relations, it's a paid relationship. And still, just the Forbes brand, 100 years old or whatever it is, has so much weight. So I do think PR is extremely important. Um, at the same time, we have to remember that very few people will read more than a couple of publications regularly. So while it's a good way, good channel to get to the right people, oftentimes, PR is usually only as good as your ability to amplify it, right? And that's where Oktopost and social media come into play, because if you're not doing the right integral work to boost and even classic PPC sometimes, and of course organic reach, which is the easiest, employee advocacy, things like that. And we really turned this into science at AppsFlyer, and I saw some amazing success this week with their recent round. So I think that PR is only as good as your ability to amplify it in other ways. And if you do everything together in an integrated marketing strategy, it's a very important pillar of what you do.
So what I also find interesting about your background is you shared that, you started off at an agency and then you went in-house. And there is this debate in the marketing world, and I think even a lot of marketers wonder, am I replaceable by an agency,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like I manage social, agencies manage social. What's the difference? Could you share a little bit, or maybe offer some tips for the marketers listening out there who are in-house on how to handle PR agencies to ensure good results, or what to measure, or how can you build that bridge between the agency and an in-house marketing team?
Yeah, it's interesting because just yesterday I posted on my LinkedIn that I think it's really important to spend time and energy, um, spend what you would internally on your team on your external teams. Meaning, it's really important to make sure they get the technology, they're motivated, they understand. Treat them as you would your internal team, because even though you might be with them just for a few months or a year or two, your success is dependent on theirs. And if you don't motivate them, they won't work as hard as you want them to. So my first tip is think of them as an extension of your team, and make sure they're gung ho about your mission as you are. My second thing is ask yourself, are they being transparent? Are they keeping you informed of outreach and results? Are they keeping you in the dark? Many PR firms are still very traditional and vague comments like, we've reached out to 10 reporters today and nobody has shown interest. I think it's important to push back in those cases, right? Who did you reach out to? Did they ignore your email? Did they open it? Did they respond? If they rejected the pitch, did they provide any feedback? Because the only way to succeed is for a PR firm to be transparent, and for the marketer to work collaboratively with the PR firm to tweak, to try different approaches, try different pitches, and work together to get results. So if you find your PR firm is being secretive and holding on to this mystique of let us do our job and succeed, it's time to look for another PR firm.
And to sum that up, something here we say at Octopost internally to one another is trust and verify. So it sounds like you're telling us that when we're working with a PR firm, just trust and verify that whatever results are coming through, that they're, what's the whys behind the results that you're getting.
Yeah, absolutely. I think trust is important, and verification in real time. So not verified later, but in real time is also important.
And you also mentioned earlier that Audioburst, it's a startup, correct?
Yeah,
So
we're 5 years old, about 45 employees.
incredible, incredible. There's the vivaciousness, if you will, of startup life. It's very thrilling.
It is.
And I think a big topic that a lot of startups have mastered is growth hacking. And I also think growth hacking and thinking like a startup is something that a lot of corporations with bigger teams that unfortunately, right, they're not necessarily in that mode of survival, and maybe in other ways they are. But how can, for any of the marketers listening out there who are in corporate, perhaps can you share a little bit about what they can learn from startups, because you have this very interesting experience going from the startup world to corporate and then back to startup. And maybe even vice versa. Like, is it the same mentality? Is it the same mindset? And what can we learn from one another?
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm no growth hacker. I started in PR, but I quickly adopted some of the thinking of growth hackers. Um, you know, Interestingly, if you look at Google Trends and search for things like making things viral, growth hacking, um, there was this spike in around 2014, 15, 16, something around then. And everybody, I remember at agencies, constantly clients saying, okay, what's the trick, right? What's the shortcut? How are we going to hack this? How are we going to make us go viral? That's stopping. Executives, clients, I think they're understanding that there's this element of luck that can't always be replicated in these, one-off success stories of companies that skyrocketed in a month. And there's a certain maturity of late that, yes, you have to use the latest tools, right? You have to A/B test. You shouldn't plan for months. You should try, trial and error. Take the agile approach to marketing, and definitely start marketing from day one, right? So it's done. Gone are the days where you develop a product and then when you're ready to sell, you start marketing it. Marketing has to start from the very beginning. There needs to be a feedback loop, and I think most people get that. Um, and they don't expect miracles. They expect hard work that will get shortcuts. So how that ties into your question is, I think that today is the mindset at both startups and larger startups like where I was or corporates. I think that gap between what, the cool, innovative stuff that startups were doing to hack the system, I think that that gap is closing, and I think it's a healthy mindset for both sides.
Interesting. Interesting. So to shift just from the startup mentality, I want to
Hmm.
talk a little bit. So, I see your great bookshelf behind you, and I know, at first I thought, wait a minute, is that a Zoom background or
Oh,
um,
it's real.
a real bookshelf? It's a fresh of breath air. Behind me, you see my window. So what's interesting, right, is we are having this conversation over Zoom in our homes, and I feel that we're all working from our homes, which has essentially made the world much smaller. How and then this question comes from this idea of how do you decide as a marketing leader, VP marketing, right? If you're building out a team, um, where do you first of all, where do you base your marketing out of? So many companies today have global marketing teams. I can speak from experience. So here at Oktopost, right, we have a team in Tel Aviv, we have a team in Atlanta, we have a team in Arizona. And did I say the UK? Wow.
No, no.
I'm like, wow. And what's interesting, right, with all of these different teams is that there are cultural nuances in how you need to market to the prospects and customers in those regions. So, does it matter where marketing sits? Is question number one when you have global team. And how do you handle, as a VP marketing, all of those cultural differences, whether they're external and you're marketing to your prospects and telling the story to your customers in those regions, or even internally to get the message out? Are there things that we should be aware of?
That's fascinating because since this crisis has started, I've been thinking a lot about the question of where teams need to sit, and of course how you communicate and remote and all that, as many executives have. And I've been thinking about my personal journey. I started out at a New York-based PR firm that decided to open an office here in Israel. And that was an interesting decision. And that went really well because we were helping Israeli startups bridge into the US. And then I moved to Boston because a nonprofit there decided they needed an Israeli and they needed them there, right? So I was trained, I was scouted, I was trained, I was brought out there. And I asked myself, like, would that happen today? And how would that work? Would I just do everything via Zoom? I traveled extensively. I did advocacy work, spoke to tens of thousands of people throughout North America. Could I really have done that via Zoom? I don't know, open-ended, right? Then I came back and I worked at a couple more US-based PR firms that decided to have a presence here. I was working for one Philadelphia-based firm that opened a Tel Aviv office and then asked me to manage the people in Philadelphia and New York. And that was challenging for me because I thought I could do it remote, but more and more I found that for the real personal relationships and for when there was crisis, I just more often than not I would hop on a plane and head out to Philadelphia for even a day and deal with that. coming back to where a marketer sits at Apps Flyer, there was a fascinating decision. For years it was, we're going to build everything out of here, which was interesting because the in Israel, because the classic approach of Israeli startups is you build the marketing next to sales in the respective market. And, and that's, by the way, that's why I left AnyClip, because at AnyClip, I helped scale it up. And then the CEO moved to New York and wanted sales next to marketing in New York. And that wasn't right for me. So we parted ways. That's the classic Israeli startup approach, is you put marketing wherever the market is. But Wix has built an enormous team of hundreds of people, and there's some other examples too, here out of Israel, supporting global markets, and they do quite well, right? And then comes Apps Flyer, which says, okay, we're going to do the same thing, and did so successfully, and yet at some level of maturity, they said, wait, now we need to shift to the regions. So what they started doing is built a hybrid model where corporate marketing headquarters still sits in Israel, and yet every local market gets a marketing team to support that market's needs. And I think that's a very smart model that seems to work really well. Here at Audioburst, it's a much smaller team. We're just starting to build it up. So for now, we're going to do it here next to the CEO, where I could be most effective. And down the line, we'll make decisions based on where, which markets we go to. I will say that we have some interesting things in Japan, and they're pretty independent at marketing themselves over there.
Interesting. And what are some of the, I guess you could call them cultural nuances, as someone who is VP marketing? So if you're sitting in Israel, I'm guessing Audioburst or your target market US, UK,
US mostly. Yeah.
US. So like, for example, holidays, for example, we have different holidays, or we have different cultural traditions. What are some of the ways that as a marketer you can incorporate? Do you incorporate, right, all of the holidays across all of the regions? If you want to send out, even like I'm thinking social media, right? So you have a LinkedIn page. We're filming today on Thanksgiving. So in America right now, a lot of people on social media are giving thanks. If you're marketing to that region, do you post on your social media a Thanksgiving image, or do you just kind of create your strategy closer to where you sit? Do you post out for every different holiday? How do we incorporate these differences into our marketing strategy to fit the region, or does it not really matter?
I think it certainly matters, and I think for us, there's so much of our focus, at least in the short term, is the U.S. market, that it's an easy decision, right? We want to speak the language of the market. You don't want to be seen as an outsider. So a lot of the content, social media, as you said, holidays, whatever, will be focused on the U.S. while being sensitive to where our employees sit as well.
Okay, interesting. And so we spoke a little bit about, well, a lot about where the marketing team should sit. And I
Yeah.
think one of the challenges with, right, so there's this great thing, right, where you really, the market has almost opened up to hire the best of the best marketers, because now with the pandemic you really can hire anybody anywhere, and everybody's working from home. But how do you build a well-oiled marketing team, taking that into consideration, that everybody is everywhere, perhaps the regions, wherever, however you've built your structure of where VP marketing sits or where your marketers sit, how do you build that well-oiled team? And what roles today would you say are, for lack of a better word, essential?
So, I'm still building my strategy, my hiring strategy. Excuse me. Um, so I'm still building my hiring strategy, and I think that what's really important to me is high quality material. So graphic designers right up there. I have already a web developer that enables me to be nimble in all kinds of settings.
All in-house roles, or are these
Graphic designer is outsourced,
okay.
and the developer is in house. And I think it's really today it it's better to create some kind of a hybrid model where you're hiring the people that you really need in house, and start outsourcing, and see, as your, especially for startups, as your needs increase, you could decide about hiring in-house. You definitely don't want to hire somebody who will be underutilized or drive them crazy. So it gives more flexibility when you outsource. I think it's important to have good content writers in-house because there's such a learning curve there. Anything that has to do with a brand. But although PR for the foreseeable future, I'm outsourcing. Even PPC, I'm starting outsourcing, and then based on results, we'll make a decision there.
Interesting. And so with that, so we talk about in-house outsourcing, some of the skill set. So at Octopost, we talk a lot about mindset, skill set, tool set, and we kind of divide what we need into those three categories. The world was catapulted into digital transformation. We also tend to talk about digital transformation in the same way, like the phases of digital transformation with mindset, skill set, and tool set. And what we've seen, and keep me honest if you've seen this as well, but it seems as though
Mm-hmm.
this year and for years building up to 2020 as well, that the role of the marketer seems to have perhaps shifted a bit. And some may make the argument that marketers need to be better technically trained with all the MarTech out there and the different technologies to be using. I mean, there's the other argument too, like is marketing more of an art or a science? So this kind of all comes in to the same question I'm about to ask. But what are the skills that you feel every marketer should have? And as you build out your marketing team, what are three skills that you look for in the marketers that you're hiring?
So I'll answer them with one answer. I think the both parts of the question, I'm looking for storytelling,
Okay.
storytelling, and storytelling,
Okay.
because you can be such an expert at tools and analytics and everything else, but if you don't know how to tell a story, you won't get results. A graphic designer needs to know how to tell a story. Your PR people definitely do. Your content writers, that's all they do is tell a story, right? Everybody on your marketing team needs to know how to tell a story, and that's an art form.
Thank you, Art. That was I really liked that answer. It was very short and to the point, but I think it's something that I will take with me as time goes on. So I want to take a moment and get really radically transparent, if you will, about a topic that I think this year there's been a lot of reallocation, concern, questions about. It's the marketing budget. Could you share with us, if you can, on this show, how are you building yours for 2021? There is so much uncertainty. What do you keep? What do you take out? How do you allocate? What are you doing with your budget? Can you help us out?
Um, I'll tell you the truth. I just started building my budget this week for 2021, and there's a lot of questions, as you said. I think we're in a good position. We raised money last year, and it's specifically to scale, right? So there is the ability and the need to spend marketing dollars on growth. It's just a matter of, like you said before, how do I build that well-oiled machine? It won't surprise you that a lot of the money is going to go towards growth performance, because that will support our sales teams that are growing. But I am, as I said, making a conscious decision to continue to spend on content, on PR, on design, on brand, because brand is everything, right? Storytelling, like I said, is everything. Brand is everything. So marketers need to make sure that, yes, they have all the tools they need in the tool stack, analytics, and they're definitely spending enough on lead gen. At the same time, don't neglect how things look. Don't neglect the brand. Don't neglect PR and the ability to really build something that's unique and people will find compelling, because if you're not engaging with target audiences, you're nothing.
The question for you, you mentioned brand is everything, and I've seen some statements around social media basically saying it's measuring brand awareness is near impossible, or measuring, right? So can you share a little bit with how you measure the success of what you're doing, or what are some of the KPIs that you look at to make sure Audioburst is on track?
Yeah, so I think, yes, brand is hard to measure. It's true. There are ways to measure it, right? So you can look at searches, you can look at organic traffic to your website. You could look at things that are impacted by a brand. You can also do brand surveys and see how people feel and think and how much they know about your brand at a given point, and then again later. But really, I think the brand is there to serve some purposes, right? So if you want to raise money, if you want to sell, if everything starts to increase, it's usually attributed to building a better brand, right? So it's going to be very hard to see an increase in sales or a successful round or whatever it is if your brand is suffering. So again, it's this. There's some standard ways of measuring the brand, and then there's things that are tied together to some other business goals and KPIs. And I think it's important to look at both.
Thanks for that. Yeah, I think so. At Oktopost, right, we always joke. Well, we don't joke. Our tagline is "We make it measurable." So it's we're always saying, in data we trust and looking how to measure. But I do think in marketing, what does sometimes get tough to measure is that in some things, maybe audio even, and then you could speak to this as well, but there's some human components to it. So, how do you, if you're all about numbers all the time, sometimes you do lose that art form or
Yeah,
creative
I
evaluation. So it's like you kind of almost have to trust in the good of marketing and just hope for the
no,
best.
it's that's really important, and I think that one way to measure the that you can't measure is ask your employees, right? So I'm always asking my employees when they come back from a conference,
Okay.
did you feel a difference in how people know about the company? Did they react differently? And if you measure and take notes over time, you can find really interesting things. So at any clip, we found this after consistent marketing, at some point, all of a sudden, when salespeople were going into companies, they had heard of us and had a positive connection to us. And it happened like at a moment in time. So if you take notes, even though this is my sense, your employees have the best sense. They're in touch with hundreds of people in the industry. So make sure to take notes about what that is that people are feeling, sensing, hearing in the market.
That is some good advice. That is some really great advice.
Thank you.
I'm going to lean on my employees. So, with that, our time is coming to a close, and I have two questions for you. The first question I have is social media is amazing. We live and breathe it, and you can
Yeah.
find so much information about anyone on social media. And I did do some due diligence, and I had looked at your LinkedIn profile, and I learned a whole lot professionally about you. What I'm hoping you might be able to share with us today is something, and you shared earlier that you're a proud father and your incredible wife. Would you be able to share something about yourself that we will not be able to find on your LinkedIn profile?
Sure. So I wasn't expecting this one, but when I was growing up, my father once called me into the living room. He was holding the newspaper of the day, the Yediot Achronot. It's the largest circulated newspaper here, and he said, "Son, come fast." Now, the backstory was every week for years he used to tell me, "The only thing you can trust in the newspaper is the date and the price." And then he would quiz me. He would say, "Son, what are the only two things you can trust in the newspaper?" And I would repeat the date and the price. And then he calls me to the living room and he says, "Son, what are the only," and of course he doesn't complete a sentence. And I say, "You can only believe the date and the price." So he looks at me and he says, "No more. From now on, you only believe the price." Because I don't know how, but somehow my father noticed that on the front page of the newspaper that day, they had misprinted the date.
Oh gosh.
And the reason I tell that story is because I think at that moment something sparked in me, in understanding how important it is to be critical of the media. And I opened up to this world of journalism, communication, marketing, and I think I've been on a quest ever since.
Incredible. I would be curious to hear what your father has to say about social media, fake news, and what we can trust on our social channels. But that's a great story. Thank you for sharing that with us. And the last question I have for you, I can definitely share with our listening audience that you have one active LinkedIn profile, and I often turn to it for advice, for tips, for hacks. Your writing style is addictive. I find myself looking for your posts, they're inspirational. So you're on LinkedIn, Ari Applbaum. Where else can we find you? Where else can we be in touch with you?
Thank you, Jen. That's really too kind. I think LinkedIn is the best place. Find me on LinkedIn, and then I'm happy to connect with people offline on WhatsApp conversation. I'm less active on other social media, although I am on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. But I think LinkedIn is the best professional way to sort of get in touch and start a conversation.
Awesome. So without further ado, Ari, thank you so much for joining us today on
This was great.
Transparent. We had a lot of fun, and we hope to have you back soon.
Thanks for listening. I'm Jennifer Gutman, your host and Director of Social Strategy at Oktopost. For more incredible episodes, be sure to follow our channel, B2B Marketing Now, wherever you get your podcasts.